COVID-19 and Education, the Pandemic's Impact on Family-School Relationships by Cindy Raymond. Here's a little background on the pandemic school closures from COVID-19. During the spring semester of the 2019-2020 school year, the coronavirus began causing mass disruptions to our schooling. In an effort to stop the spread of what we refer to now as COVID-19, governments nationwide began closing down schools. Eventually, schools were declared closed in at least 48 states and 4 U.S. territories for the remainder of the academic school year. This affected at least 50.8 million public school students. This includes our public pre-K programs, whom are attended by 1.6 million children nationwide. Timeline of events. By the end of January, our first U.S. case of coronavirus emerges and is documented. February 27th, we have our first coronavirus scare in Washington State and a school shuts down for cleaning. By March the 11th, WHO declares COVID-19 a pandemic. By March the 25th, all U.S. public school buildings are closed. And by May the 6th, all states except for 2, Wyoming and Montana, have announced that schools will not resume at all for the 2019-2020 school year. By the beginning of May, remote learning is commonplace, with 80% of teachers interacting with students virtually. Going into our current school year 2021, COVID-19 is still proving to be a redefining moment for our students, families, and schools. As of today, there is no real reliable treatments or a vaccination in place for COVID-19, so non-pharmaceutical responses such as school closures, quarantines, face masks, and banning of public gathering have been implemented. But finding the right balance with opening schools has been very difficult. So schools around the globe have adopted some form of online learning in an effort to continue educational services when closures are mandated. Here you'll see 3 types of remote learning that most schools have adopted: virtual learning, hybrid learning, and remote learning. Research has shown that children are spending on average of 4.2 hours a day, or 46% of their waking time, on remote learning, with parents dedicating on average 2.5 hours per day in support of their child's learning at home. Current reports also state the impact of school closures and how they can negatively affect our students, families, and communities as a whole. For example, some harmful effects include interrupted learning, of course, with idleness, which could result in an increase in crimes among our teenage children, loss of interest in school, and poor academic performance. Nutritional services have been interrupted as many U.S. children depend on the school systems for nutritional meals. There's an unequal access to digital learning portals. There's increased pressures on schools and school systems that do remain open throughout the pandemic. There's social isolation and increased pressures on families. The shift to this home-based schooling in an effort to continue our educational services has had a number of impacts on relationships between families and school. While there have been some negative effects on online learning for families, there's also been some positive impacts on the actual family-school relationships. And below you'll see the difference between the two. It's a well-known fact among educators and schools that positive relationships between families and schools are key to a student's success. Obviously, the closure of schools has left educators with the huge responsibility of how to best support the children and their families while they are at home. One report from the Institute of Educational Services states that out of urgency to help families survive a crisis, we've actually pivoted to become first responders of sorts. So family engagement is changing during the pandemic because schools are using more methods to reach families, and we're trying to ensure that families have the resources needed for food, housing, information on COVID-19 and school policies, and using technology as needed have emerged. Before going into the 2020 school year, a general perception for many was that the responsibility of a child's education lay heavily on the responsibility of the school. But DeCruz states that with having children educated in a digital teaching and learning environment from home has actually given parents more of a responsibility for their child's education, helping them to realize that they have an enormous influence on what is happening with their children. Throughout history, records have shown that on multiple occasions, when faced with contagious public health crises that affects children, school dismissals or closures are a common response. To date, COVID-19 has caused the most disruption to school learning, but some comparisons can be made to the influenza pandemic of 1918. One report finds that closing schools during the midst of a pandemic may actually contribute to as much as 15% reduction in cases and up to a 40% reduction in peak attack rates. During the influenza pandemic of 1918, Stern et al. Cites that two of America's largest cities in 1918, New York and Chicago, kept schools open with the thought that children were better off in school under supervision versus running the streets. They did implement strong school hygiene policies, but many classrooms still emptied out anyway due to the high rates of absenteeism. Parents were just simply scared to send their children. In many of the states during the influenza pandemic, teachers of closed schools volunteered in the community with health inspections and campaigns to reach ethnic communities. Some cities created mail-in homework correspondences to continue education to high school students. And one city set up teacher courses for teachers to expand on their subject and teaching knowledge during the closure of the classrooms. In reflection, past crises like the Great Recession permanently reduced achievement and attainment among American students, with negative effects particularly concentrated in lower-income school districts. These disruptions may be especially acute for younger disadvantaged children who would likely have the most to gain from high-quality early childhood education and services. So what can we do differently this time around? As of today, it's far too early to know the impacts of the pandemic that has had on family-school relationships. What is known, though, is that there's been a global increase in the use of technology to try to help curb the effects of the pandemic to build connection and relationships among teachers, families, and students. While technology has given us useful resources in building these connections, the digital divide can have long-lasting negative effects on the family-school relationship if we're not careful. So technology is something we have today that they didn't have during the pandemic of 1918. The digital divide is a gap between those who do or do not have access to technology. This can hinder family social links to the schools and their child's ability to complete schoolwork. President Donald Trump announced plans to address broadband connectivity in future economic relief efforts related to the outbreak. With schools turning to the internet for remote instruction during closures, children in low-income families, rural isolation, and other underserved groups are facing significant challenges with the digital divide. So access to the internet remains a serious concern for teachers' abilities to interact with their students and families. And with remote instruction becoming the new normal and the increased use of technology to help alleviate the effects of the pandemic, many schools have promoted resources needed for families to try to connect them and to become more online society. Some examples include providing students with Chromebooks, using a digital platform for instruction, training parents in the use of technology, and some internet companies have even offered reduced rates at the beginning of the pandemic. In an effort to support engagement and learning during the pandemic, there are several solutions or activities that can be used to modify the negative impacts of school closures and social isolation families are facing. We actually have the opportunity to redefine family engagement and possibly build deeper connections with families. I'm going to discuss some possible solutions or activities to help modify the digital gap and enhance the use of technology. One solution is making sure that families are doing okay is to have weekly check-ins through telephone calls. And I put non-educational here because this should be about teachers individualizing services for families, knowing where the families are, what their struggles may be when it comes to homework or access to being online, if printed packets might be more useful. And this activity can benefit dual language learners as well, as conversations can be translated as needed. If a family has no telephone, then a simple drive-by will help as well. Virtual parent-teacher conferences and open houses. Virtual parent-teacher conferences during the pandemics will help families stay up to date on their child's learning process, goals, and strengths. Conferences can be held through a school-wide platform or through Zoom. Phone calls work for conferences as well if families are not online. Families that are online can use a digital portfolio platform such as Seesaw to give them the opportunity to see their children's work digitally through videos and pictures. In many early childhood programs, parents feel left out not being able to walk their child into the classroom or to see their child's classroom. So it could be helpful for teachers to provide a digital walkthrough to give parents the opportunity to see their child's room and displayed work. This activity can help enhance the use of technology and staying connected. Again, if parents are not online, the use of telephones and pictures can help them stay connected as well. Then there's virtual class meets. Utilizing virtual class meets helps families and the children stay connected. Classrooms can interact through Zoom or Google Classroom during school closures and quarantines. This activity will enhance using technology and staying connected. Family engagement nights. To include to build relationships and give families time to connect one another, schools can host engagement events. Of course, this cannot be done in person, so we'll have to use and think outside the box and do this virtually or through the use of video. A family engagement event my school is working on now is dinner and a museum show. Each classroom is working on an art project that will be displayed at our central office. We'll video a walkthrough of the art projects as well as the documentation of the process from each classroom to show off the children's work. Families will be provided a link, and if no internet access, a CD of the walkthrough, a bag with pizza making kits, modeling clay for children. Families will be encouraged to make the pizza dinner together, watch the walkthrough of the displayed art, and use the model magic to create art of their own. Families can then take pictures of their work and post it to the school's platform. Then there's mail-in and drop-off services. This is one solution to help families with the digital divide, is utilizing the mailing schoolwork and using a drop-off and pick-up type of service. School employees that are not utilized during shutdowns can help with these services. This will help keep families with no internet access connected to learning as well. The following are some reflective questions for you. There are 5, but we can just talk about 1 or 2. As you read each question, think about which one you'd like to discuss. I look forward to the discussions, and thank you for listening.